Hey everybody, this is Aaron with News Up North. I'm covering Canadian and global news with a northern perspective. I am working in the tech industry. I'm married with kids. I live in Western Canada, and yeah, I just want to cover a bunch of stories today. I'll start with an article from National Post that's covering this, the trade disputes with Trump. He's basically, he's on the warpath, as everybody knows. Trying to get the best deal for, his mega movement in the United States, and obviously that's causing some pretty unpredictable situations around the world, not the least of which in Canada with our auto sector, which I'm going to cover a story on that first. And yeah, let's get into it. So here we have this article from the National Post. It's called Trump's Tariffs Present Unpredictable Threat to Auto Workers in Oshawa. So yeah, anyways, it's really interesting because it's like this sector has actually been on a downturn for quite some time. In Eastern Canada, I think it was like back in 2019, there was like a massive layoff in that area. I forget what the city was, but they had like a huge layoff of like thousands of people, where the government, I believe, had to step in and like help people a lot in their transitions. But the industry almost got wiped out, and then it kind of turned around. The General Motors ended up, I think they got some help from the government, but then they like turned it around and basically were able to have less factories, but they still were able to produce. And obviously, they do that in partnership with factories in the States, where vehicles kind of go back and forth with parts going across the line several times as they make these vehicles. And typically, what's built there is trucks now. So they have like I think it's Chevy trucks. It's like Silverados and such. But they got the picture here. I think that's pretty sure that's a Chevy, if I'm not mistaken, or it's like a GM of some kind, maybe a Sierra or whatever. But anyways, yeah, actually they have it in here where there was a lot of plant closures back in 2019. Yeah, here we go. What do we got here? The auto industry has gone through ups and downs since its inception. Workers have weathered economic recessions, layoffs, and devastating plant closures, including in 2019 when General Motors stopped production of vehicles in Oshawa for nearly 2 years. So that's a massive hit. These people have already gone through stuff like this, so obviously they're freaked because it could wipe them out this time. If Trump turns on the gears and our government doesn't, come up with a deal with them that makes sense for both sides, it could wipe out this industry, which is pretty freaky for people there. They've already gone through this kind of stuff in the past. Anyways, so most recently there was 25% tariffs put on, and there's some exceptions as long as like certain things were followed within Kuzma, as we call it. Um, the USMCA, I think, is what they originally called it, but in Canada we're calling it Kuzma just because it's easier to say probably, and it puts Canada at the front of the line. So I think that's what our politicians have been saying and like talking heads and whatnot. So, anyways, Carney came out and had some basic things to say about it. So we'll replay that here. And, listen to what he has to say after these tariffs came on the other day.
And today I'm announcing that the Government of Canada will be responding by matching the U.S. approach, with 25% tariffs on all vehicles imported from the United States that are not compliant with CUSMA, our North American Free Trade Agreement, and on the non-Canadian content of CUSMA-compliant vehicles from the United States as well. We take these measures reluctantly, and we take them in ways that's intended and will cause maximum impact in the United States and minimum impact here in Canada.
Yeah, so it's actually a fairly measured approach. I'm not going to knock him on the way that he responded. He's just, being pretty chill about it. Saying we're going to hit back hard. We're going to do basically matching tariffs to offset what Trump is doing on their side. And they've already had some discussions, and I think Trump's basically understands that Carney's going to roll over. If Carney gets into power, that's next election. God help us. If he got in, Trump knows he's going to roll over. Carney knows he's going to roll over. They want business as usual between Canada and the United States. It's like the basically strongest partnership anywhere in the world. We share this massive unprotected border. This is going to hurt Americans if they do this. And I think most of this is like rhetoric because Trump wants more free trade and he wants us to like drop some of our barriers and actually create a stronger union between the two countries. I mean, I'm sure he think it would be great to have us as a 51st state, but it's a totally ridiculous notion to have the entire nation of Canada as a 51st state. It makes like no sense. It would never happen. And the only thing that could happen is if honestly, if Carney wins, you could see a Western separation of something like Alberta. The separatist movement or the independence movement is growing again in Alberta in particular, but also, there's some in Saskatchewan. Um, but yeah, anyways, I would say mainly it's in Alberta because of the oil and gas industry that's just been totally crapped on by Eastern Canada ultimately, but under the Liberal government, in particular, right? But Quebec doesn't want to play ball with Alberta in terms of doing an actual pipeline to them. Right now, the way that it works is, as you may know, but for those who don't, Alberta will sell its oil to the United States uh, as like crude oil, which it has a particular name. It's like, the raw form, it's like a thick crude oil. So it's actually harder to process because they get it out of oil sands typically, and then it gets sent down into the States. It actually gets mixed with lighter oil so that they can ship it through pipelines. But anyways, it goes down to the States. Then the States refines that oil and actually sells it to other countries, obviously including us. I think like something like 98% of our oil and gas industry goes to the States, which is bonkers. But anyways, it goes down to the States and then back up to like Eastern Canada and all over the place. And so it's just interesting. We're basically getting crapped on by Eastern Canada because we have these equalization payments, and Alberta gets hosed for I think it's upwards of like 20 billion a year, some ridiculous thing. Meanwhile, everybody's trying to like stop us from producing more and exporting it to other countries and stuff. So not helpful at all. Anyways, um, that's a whole other industry we can get into in another show. I can go into a lot more on that. But the auto sector is something that I've been learning about more because typically that's been in Eastern Canada. Um, so it's funny because it's like that's one of their big industries over there. Um, so this has been interesting for me to try to look into this more. So, like I said, like back in 2019, General Motors had to stop production for almost 2 years, which is pretty bonkers. I think they ended up getting help from the federal government for a while. But yeah, like I said, yeah, one of the other things that was interesting with this article, as I was reading it, then I was looking into some other stuff, and um, one of the interesting things that could happen with there was like basically Trump was like, I'm tariffing everybody like 10% across the board, like guaranteed. Um, and there's going to be like tariffs on every other country or all the European Union countries and stuff like that. Um, it's possible that if Canada gets a better deal with the United States than other countries, that a lot of other countries will start like moving material into Canada to like basically finish the production of things in Canada instead of going directly to the United States, and then we can actually get more trade from other countries because they basically use us as a proxy to get into the US market without getting smacked with higher tariffs by going directly into the States. So that'd be interesting to see how that plays out. I'll definitely be watching to see how that shapes up. Um, but anyways, so going back to this, it talks about how Trump, his apparent goal, he says it is, and it always changes. That's why it's like so difficult to know what's going on. So it's part of the reason why I want to do this stuff is to kind of cover it because people are like, what's actually happening? It's so confusing, which it is. That's why I can't stand about what he's doing is he keeps changing his mind. And it's on purpose. I really think it's on purpose a lot of the time to basically, go for everything in the kitchen sink, make people be like, what's going on? Like they almost like knuckle under just because they want things to go back to normal. And he's looking for the best deal possible for the United States. I think it's a terrible way to go about it, but for better or worse, that's what he's probably doing. So he says his goal is to move manufacturing jobs back to the United States from like all over the place, right? So, if that's true, then that means that there are like thousands and thousands of jobs um, all over the world, right? Potentially hundreds of thousands from all over the world that he's trying to bring back in the United States. So, like it says here, it means that there's hundreds or thousands of jobs, within this Ontario area alone, right? That could be lost if Trump tries to like move all of the manufacturing into the States instead of sharing the manufacturing process between the two countries. Um, yeah, it should be interesting to see how that happens. I think it's almost like it can get pretty ridiculous because I find this weird because Trump talks about being like this free trade president, um, but he's almost going more leftist in this area, like very protectionist, almost like that you would see from like this is gonna seem so bad, but almost from like Soviet era, where like we're just gonna do everything ourselves and we're gonna have this enclosed, you know, market and we're gonna do it efficiently, everything ourselves, which frankly is stupid. It's proven over and over and over that if generally speaking, the more free market trade that you do, the better off everyone is over time. Obviously, there are, situations where if you need to move quickly, sometimes, bringing in and like forcing things through government measures can help, depending on, sometimes in like a crisis situation or something, government can move fast and make things happen. The problem is that, there's always like this cascade effect that happens in the market when they start messing with the levers of trade and industry, right? So that's what I mean. Like I see Trump doing this, where he's like trying to force all of these things to happen through tariffs, and it seems really dumb. Instead of just like coming to the leaders in Canada and other countries and saying, look, we are going to be changing this and we will force it if we have to. But really, what we want to do is try to find a mutually beneficial relationship here where we're not getting hosed constantly. And you guys have to admit we're getting these like massive deficits with different countries, and then go about it that way. Be like, you're going to have to change the way that this trade is done. I'm not asking you, I'm telling you, but let's try to make this transition work well for everybody. But we have issues at home, we need to deal with them, blah 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 blah. Anyways, he's more of like a hammer. He's not he's not very like uh you know precise in his measures, and he doesn't seem to care when it hurts people. Being that he's a billionaire, I think he's out of touch in this regard. Like their stock market has dropped by 10%, and that's just been the first few months of the year. It's like, oh, 10%, it's not a big deal. Well, actually, it is a big deal because it's trillions and trillions of dollars. I think it's like $10 trillion or something crazy. And like five of that in particular has only happened within the last like month. Like, pow, I mean, record drops. Um, Not good. And people, like real businesses, real humans all over Canada and the United States get wiped out from that stuff. And they might not ever come back. You know what I mean? So, to be like, oh no, Trump's got a plan. Well, maybe he does have a plan, but it's definitely wrecked a lot of people. And, you know, for literally the most powerful leader in the world to do that kind of stuff willy nilly, but, and then spout off about, oh, it's just a short term pain. We'll be fine. Well, you'll be fine. Big companies will be fine. They'll probably make it through, but, the small business people, and even some of these bigger industries, like they could friggin' get destroyed through situations like this. Because is the government in Canada going to step in and help all the small businesses that get frickin' smashed by all of these measures? I don't really think that that's going to happen. And, maybe they can help a little bit, but this stuff destroys. It destroys people. It's not good. Um, yeah. Anyway, so this is what's this guy's name? Jeff Gray. Yeah, so he's like the president of Unifor in that area in Oshawa. It's called local, for Unifor Local 222. Anyways, basically he says like we're going to go to war here, we have to, but he's also asking for help from the federal government. Um, they're trying everything they can to try and make this happen. They don't have a direct connection to the president, right? So they're just trying to like work through employers on the other side of the line and be like, hey, can you please talk to your president? Like we're working together, we've been together for ages, right? Talks about how this industry has been around since like the early 1900s, and they've gone through several mergers and stuff like that. It used to be called this uh, McLaughlin Motors or something, and they used to actually specific cars, which I think they show later in this thing. Where is it? If you go back, I think they've got pictures. Yeah, here they are. There's like the old vehicles in the Canadian Automotive Museum. It's pretty cool. The 1908 McLaughlin Model F, and then there's a 1955 Buick Special. That's pretty cool. I'd love to go out east and see this stuff at some point. There's so many amazing historical things in Canada that are back east that are pretty amazing. Um, Anyways, yeah, it's pretty scary for people. They've already gone through this before. Um, the industry is slowing down. So one of the things, and this gets into like transitioning economies based on technology, things that are happening, and I've been thinking about this from kind of like the macro level. And I feel like this industry is from a manpower perspective or like the human side of the building of vehicles, it's a dying industry in that sense. Not that that industry is going to die altogether, but that it's going to have to move more towards robotics, more and more, and there'll be less people uh, doing, the work. Now, obviously, it will take a very long time before robots will do like the super, complex. Manufacturing where you're putting stuff together. There's some things that aren't as efficient for robots to do, the way that things get put together. But eventually, that's what's going to happen. You know, so humans are going to get phased out of the manufacturing process eventually. And to push back on that ultimately seems like a losing battle to me. Let me know in the comments what you think. If that's wrong, if you think otherwise, let me know why. But I think that ultimately this stuff will have to get phased out, with the onset of, AI becoming much more powerful and then working that into, manufacturing with bots in all of these factories. I think that eventually that's how it's going to be. And it's not that people will just, oh, you don't have a job anymore. It's just people need to transition into jobs that are more like management roles, using AI and like controlling things and getting more into programming. And I don't want to like be insensitive, like, hey, just learn to code, you'll be fine. But there is a level of that where it's like, look, at people are going to have to transition. I often think back to things like when the automobile actually came about. Like before that, people were using literally animal power, literal horsepower, right? Where the horse industry was massive and it was a livelihood for many, 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 many people, right? And that industry largely got wiped out by the automobile industry as it took over in terms of the workload that these vehicles could handle, and then the transportation and things like that. So these transitions do happen, and the thing is you want the free market to take care of it. You don't want typically governments coming in and like mandating changes and forcing industries to change super fast, because then it can cause like a cascade effect that's negative in the market. Whereas, if these things can happen in the free market slowly, then people can start to kind of transition out of these areas over time. But there really doesn't seem like there's anything you can do. There's always going to be these like kind of critical events, or catastrophic events that just the market changes so quickly. It doesn't matter whether the government steps in or the free market just kind of takes its course. People are going to get hurt, and that is the nature of markets. So yeah, it's a pretty crazy story. Um, I'll definitely be keeping an eye on this. I'm going to read more about the auto sector. If anybody that's listening has any like good articles or can point me to places where I can learn more about this, issue in particular, by all means, mention in the comments. If you think anything that I said was stupid and I should, look at something different and have a different perspective, by all means, let me know what you think in the comments. Um, Obviously these people are going to continue to fight for their jobs. That's what this Jeff guy was saying. This leader was saying they will keep fighting to build these vehicles in Canada. So that's great. I don't think that any of our leaders want these people to be wiped out. Right, left, or otherwise. It doesn't. Everybody is unified in trying to keep Canadians working. So the rest of this article talks about some of the history of on the automotive sector in Oshawa in particular. So it's an interesting read. You can check it out on National Post. They still let people read stuff there for free without a paywall. So, anyways, we will move on here. The next article that I wanted to cover was this one about. This is really interesting. It's about Elon Musk and the break from Trump on tariffs, which and this is interesting. Like, let's just watch the video and then I'll talk a little bit about it. So I found this interesting.
I hope that the United States and Europe uh, can establish a very close partnership. We obviously are, there's an alliance already, but I'm hopeful that there can be a very close relationship with America and Europe. And I'm hopeful, for example, with the tariffs, that at the end of the day, I hope it is agreed that both Europe and the United States should move, ideally, in my view, to a zero tariff situation, effectively creating a free trade zone between Europe and North America. And that that would be that's what I hope occurs. Um, and also more freedom of people to move between Europe and
Yeah, it's interesting that he's kind of broken away from Trump's rhetoric on tariffs. Like Trump's like, "Oh, tariffs are the greatest thing ever," rah, rah, rah. And it, Musk doesn't like it, and I think even from just him being a business owner, and he has like it's a multinational companies that he has, and just Tesla alone, right? He's got to build these cars. This complex thing, having to deal in all the different economies and getting parts from here and there, and he's got like intellectual property, in different countries, and he's got to move parts from China and to and from, and he's putting everything together in Texas, I think, right? Is his main hub for Tesla. Um, but anyways, if there's tariffs, that actually does hurt him, right? So just from a personal level, I don't think he likes it, but I don't think it's only a self-interested idea. I think that he really does believe in it. Like he's definitely more of a typically more of a libertarian type of person. I certainly don't think he's a conservative, although in his personal life, some issues in regards to like political correctness or wokeness, he has definitely moved more towards the conservative mindset um, in that way. But in terms of like economically, I think he's very much a big free trade guy, very libertarian, um, almost more of like anarcho-capitalist type of person, if you know the term. Um, but it's weird because he also got a lot of his money from government subsidies as he built Tesla, at least in the beginning. Yeah, he's an interesting character. A lot of people try to like treat these people as like very black and white. It's like, oh, he's a right wing extremist, or they might say he's a lefty, wolf in sheep's clothing type of people. Like people will say that about him on the right. People will say that, right? Um, but like most people, he's a complex individual and he has his own personal interests and his own views on things. I think it's good that he says these types of things, even though he has been obviously tied at the hip with Trump, especially in regards to this Doge thing that he's in on, advising and kind of like leading that whole thing of what they call it, the Department of Governmental Efficiency or something like that. Anyways, he's an interesting guy. I think that he's right in saying like we need more trade, not less. We need like less tariffs, not more tariffs. And I largely agree with him. I think that that's the way to go, even if it is a self-interested position for him. I do think ultimately that's what people should be doing. And some have speculated on the right and the left that he's just saying this because he knows that what Trump eventually wants is a no tariff situation between the countries, and that's what his aim is to actually bring tariffs down everywhere. Um, and it's just Trump's doing it in kind of this chaotic way, right? Aggressive, chaotic way. Anyways, he goes on here to talk about people also being able to move freely between the U.S. and Europe, and I think this ultimately would obviously include Canada, just this whole mindset. So, anyways, we'll just let him finish it.
more freedom of people to move between Europe and North America, if they wish. If they wish to work in Europe or wish to work in America, they should be allowed to do so, in my view. So that has certainly been my advice to the president.
Yeah, anyway, so he also wants that with work, which interesting views. It's more of this like free trade, freedom of movement, kind of global community. I would say it's more like Western global community is more what he would like to see. And I think obviously again in self-interest he would love to see that for his own companies because yeah, it would be helpful for him, right? He'd make more money. It'd make things a lot easier on him. But I think that's the same for a lot of people that would love to do more trade globally. So interesting point of view. Let me know what you think about what he's trying to do. Do you think that he's just purely self-interested, or do you think that he really believes this stuff for everyone? Do you think he's an idiot? I know that he did attack this Peter Navarro, which is like a big wig on the right. Um, he actually slams him. You roll down here. Elon starts going after this Peter Navarro guy. Peter Navarro like defends the tariffs and says like, "Oh, we need these tariffs. It's going to help us. They're a good tool." Anyways, I'll play him and then I'll show how like Elon kind of attacks him here.
The economist tools because it's based on concepts like export and import demand elasticities, currency adjustments, and things like that. But here's the analytical issue we're trying to do under the principle that the president wants to charge those countries what they charge us. As you pointed out, Vietnam has a applied tariff rate that's much larger than ours, but doesn't come near the tariff we've charged them. So the question is, how do you value the following, Phil? So let me count the ways. You got to value currency manipulation. You got to value the VAT.
So just so you understand, he's saying like when you're trying to figure out what these tariffs should be, you need to you need to look at the relationship with a particular country and value these things, like put a value to them. And then that's how you will determine what a tariff should be if you're going to have one. Now, I just have a comment to make after he's done saying this, because I thought this was pretty funny of him saying this. This is like this Harvard educated economist, right? He's like a famous guy.
You got to value the VAT tax distortions, dumping, export subsidies.
Sorry, VAT is like a GST that other countries have. VAT that's like all over the world. Canada's basically equivalent of sales tax.
Technical barriers to trade, export subsidies, technical barriers to trade, agricultural barriers to trade, quotas, bans, counterfeiting, intellectual property theft, and all of that. So here's the punchline. If you look at the trade deficit, which every country runs from us, the first thing economists should tell you, ask the next one you have on your show, should the U.S. have chronic and sustained trade deficits?
No, there's
according to economic theory, they should not. So what the trade deficit does for any given country, it's the sum of all cheating. It's the sum of all unfair trade practices. And in a national emergency where the trade deficit itself is the national emergency and security threat because it takes our factories, our jobs, and transfers wealth abroad, the reciprocal tariff is that which reduces.
In a way, like Navarro, in a way, he's not wrong. Now, Elon attacks him immediately, of course, but in a way, he's not wrong in that, yeah, like if you're going to use tariffs, the way that you use them is supposed to be strategic, and it kind of is from a country to country basis because you need to know what it is that that country is doing um, in their economy and how they are trying to quote unquote manipulate your market to try and get the biggest trade surplus in the relationship between the two countries. So he's like, you got to know, what tariffs are they putting on us, and what are the trade imbalances, and how are they manipulating particular industries and stealing intellectual property, or how are their laws set up to protect their industries from us? Like, are they blocking us in trade? How much? What sectors? How does that work? Like he's whatever. There's all these different things. So it's funny because people on the right typically have more of a mindset, supposedly, of free market capitalism, right? Free trade. And it's typically been more the left that has been this more like protectionist, let's tariff, let's like control the economy, or, people call it a planned economy, where you have people trying to manipulate all these numbers instead of allowing the market to go where it wants to go in order that the consumers actually get the biggest benefit. And it's kind of like two ideological views that come up against each other. And if you're in a crisis situation where things change really, really fast, um, because of some catastrophic event, that's where the more, what I would say, the leftist perspective of having a controlled economy can help, because they can come in and like stop other countries from trading to try and protect our people. In our case, Canada, or they could say in the United States, they try to protect their own people and force the others out, um, instead of allowing the free market to take its course. Because in a free market situation, when there's, a catastrophic change in the industry, it can wipe out jobs. It just does. It happens. But at the same time, historically, a free trade market is the most efficient market because prices are controlling the economy, not government bureaucrats that are trying to plan everything. The prices of the goods and the services can move faster, and they're like signals. And you learn this like in basic economics. The prices are like signals to the economy to the businesses of what's happening. Um, so typically, when people watch that, it's easier for every like small industry to basically see those things and make the adjustments on like a micro level than having, you know, big, you know, big government come in and try to, oh, well, what's happening here and what's happening there, and try to like control all these things. They literally just don't have the brain capacity. They don't have the speed to move quickly enough to change and control an economy. And you see this in all of the like major kind of communist and socialist um, governments in history that tried to do this, most notably like Russia and the Soviet Union, you know, tried to control their economy and they just could not take it. You know, famous book, really well known. I think it's interesting because it kind of writes it from the perspective of economists within Soviet Russia. It's called Red Plenty, and it's really interesting. It kind of just shows, you know, the rise and the fall of their economy from the perspective of one of their economists um, going through it and all of the, you know, the cultural and political landmines that you know individual went through as that was happening, and then like how he admired the and was kind of questioning, was like shocked by how the Western countries were operating in more of a free market and how it worked efficiently, and they were just like shocked, like how could this be, right? But anyways, historically that just has worked, and it brings the greatest amount of prosperity um, over time. And again, it does not mean that there isn't problems. There is cronyism. Like people will be like, capitalism's bad, rah rah rah. But it, you know, capitalism is basically just free market. The problem is when there's monopolies and when there's like lobbyists that go to the government, and then they start getting control and they block competitors and stuff like that, and they try to block people out of the market. When that kind of stuff happens, that's where the free, you know, free trade market can go awry. But that's more from like massive companies trying to take advantage. Um, but it's a give and take. There's trade-offs. When you're a really massive company, you have a difficult time quickly innovating and changing with the times. And if you don't innovate, you're going to get squashed, especially in our current world where technology is moving so quickly. If you can't move quickly, you're done, right? So, anyways, that's a whole other subject you get into. That's why big companies are moving into AI and they want to like eat up everybody's data because if they can crunch the data, then they can get a heads up on where industries and culture and politics are moving to, and then they can get ahead of it, and then they can stay in control. So, you know, there's like all these weird kind of complex things that are happening because of technology now that probably weren't considered in the past because they just didn't exist in terms of advantages that large players can have versus like smaller players. Um, but it doesn't always mean that the larger companies will get control because you know a lot of the technology is open source and people can use things like AI and big data to if they know what they're doing and they're sophisticated enough they can punch way above their weight class. So it's not always the big companies that win. Anyways, yeah, if you found anything about that in particular interesting, let me know. If there's anything that you disagreed with or agreed with, I'd like to hear what you think about the issue in terms of you know this trade stuff, any tariffs and whatnot. The last thing, and this gets into the big tech companies. The last thing that I wanted to cover, and it kind of goes in a little bit of a different direction, but I found it quite interesting, is Meta, or what people used to know as Facebook. So let's switch over to that. So we got the Meta fact checking program is officially going to end Monday. So that's tomorrow. Um, or depending on when you're listening, maybe today. So this is a big deal. You know, this has actually been going on for a while. They were talking about this, I think, even before Trump's inauguration, or maybe it was like in January sometime. But anyways, Facebook also owns Instagram, and they're officially ending their fact checking program Monday. So people that are on Facebook, you know, how it's like this really invasive. Like you go on there and you go to post something like, "Are you sure you want to do this? This article's from a right wing extremist," and rah rah rah. Maybe I don't know if you want to post this. Yeah, it was freaking ridiculous. It was like totally Big Brother, right? Um, they're going to be shutting that down officially. It says that that means no new fact checks and no fact checkers. I think this is great personally. Some people hate it. So like misinformation, disinformation. My attitude is, you know what? There is no reason that you as an individual cannot go and get good information, especially in the age of AI, where you can actually go and look at different perspectives very, very easily using AI. Then I know people are like, oh, well, the AI is skewed and rah rah rah. Yeah, I think it is in some ways, but if you it's all in the way that you prompt it, you can actually get multiple perspectives, and then you can, believe what you want to believe. If you prompt an AI to say like, hey, what's the mainstream position on this thing, on this fact checking, like literally. Then go into Grok or ChatGPT or whatever. I still think ChatGPT is the best right now, but I use Grok a bit as well. I don't use Gemini much, um, but there's multiple ones out there. Whatever. If you go into them and you basically say, "What's the mainstream view on this?" They'll tell you it'll tell you what it thinks, and then you can say, what is more like the right wing view of this particular issue. It'll literally just tell you, say, can you give me references to that? Are there articles you could find or videos that you could find to kind of show the right wing perspective on this issue? And then it'll usually frame it and at least give you an area where you can go and check it out. You can say, what's the more left leaning view on this issue? Can you give me some sources on that so I can go check it out? It'll do it. Like it will show you. Right. And it's like you can just go back and forth with it and really just argue with it a bit and try to get some sort of a balanced perspective on the issue. And if you use ChatGPT, for instance, it's pretty good about giving you a fairly balanced view on things. Obviously, there's sometimes that's not true, but typically it's not that bad as long as you prompt it properly. People will be like, "Oh, it's a lefty freaking system," and yeah, it might be, but you can still get the information. It just matters how you frame your questions or your prompts, as they call it, to to AI in order to get multiple perspectives. And the bottom line is if you want to know the truth about things, you need to research. Typically you're not going to get the whole meal deal by reading headlines on friggin' Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. Like that's just ridiculous. You're not even going to get it from news sites because most of the industry is just trying to get clicks quickly. That's it. The news is moving so fast that these companies that are trying to make money, that's what they're doing. They're trying to make money. And I mean, even like when I make this video, I went through for this because it's like literally my first one. I went through a couple iterations of this video because I started making one and then I was like, this is going to be so outdated within literally a day or two. So why would I cover this other issue? Like there was some other stuff that I was going to cover and I was like, this is pointless because this news is going to be outdated. So uh, I eventually was like, I did this video, right? And I was like, you know what, whatever. Like it is what it is. I will cover news and I'll try to go a little bit deeper and just like share perspectives and try to like basically share views in such a way that I'm trying to get you to think for yourself. So it's like I'll try to like guide you in the sense that I'll show you what I see and what I think, but ultimately my goal is to try and get people to like look at the news, look at it from a couple of perspectives, and then actually go and look at the stuff yourself. Read books, read about history, read about current events, and get into it. And I criticize people a lot and I don't do it from like a judgmental point of view, but I criticize people about like how much time they spend watching freaking sports. And not that you shouldn't. I watch it too. More into like um, martial arts stuff, MMA and whatnot. Um, but on the sports side of things, but I used to be a huge sports fan, especially hockey, um, when I was younger. But as time's gone on, I just realized like so much of that stuff. It reminds me of like the Roman Colosseum, where it's just used as like fodder for people to not pay attention to the culture that's falling down around their ears, and they're just like, I know all the things about sports. And it's like, good for you. Like, is it making you money? Because if it's not, then what value are you getting out of it other than some community value, right? Hanging out with buddies and talking about stuff, and literally just entertainment. Like, what are you getting from it? You're spending like at least if you're getting into like specific culture and political understandings and historical understandings, there's a value to you as an individual, and there's a value to your family and your friends because you can inform them about what's going on. Ultimately, that will make a difference in the culture because if people are well informed if it's a well-informed public, it's much harder for politicians and big industry to manipulate you. Um, with literally clickbaity headlines and such. So, um, yeah, I guess that's it. I'll kind of finish this off. You can go look into this. This isn't hard to find, but I wanted to point it out. This is a big deal. It's really helpful. I still think in Canada there's this stupid thing uh, with our previous government, basically trying to tell these things, Facebook and Google and everybody to like, where you have to pay our news sites and stuff. So so that if you're gonna post their stuff, then you got to pay them. That was the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. Like, to tell companies that tell a company, like, if you're gonna put these links on your platform, then you have to pay us for them. It's just like, what? Who are you? Like, you don't butter my bread. That's basically what Facebook and Google said. It was like, fine, we'll just friggin' remove all of your information, which I think Google actually kind of changed a little bit on that, but Facebook was like, screw you. You guys, fine, you can't post news then. And that's what it is. Like, I can't stand that. That drives me crazy. It makes me not want to use Facebook anymore because, you try to post like a news thing and it's like, nope, you actually can't do that. You're like, frack. So, it's actually hurt Canadians from being able to get proper information because, the government blocks it. And I don't know if that was planned or what, but, our government under Trudeau was railing against misinformation. And it's like, you can't even get a free flow of information because you blocked all the friggin' news sites. So hopefully that turns around if Polyev gets into power. But anyways, maybe you think differently. If you do, let me know what you think in the comments. The other thing is, like, what do you think about Zuckerberg and his new image? I think he spent a lot of money and effort trying to redo his image so he's not like a friggin' cyborg anymore. So he gets made fun of as like this no no personality like android, which sadly he kind of looked like that. He's like super pasty. He's like hello. But, I think he's done a pretty good job revamping his image. Jeff Bezos did the same thing, right? They got like all muscular, probably on TRT, testosterone therapy, right? But Zuckerberg was legit. Like, he was legit training MMA and stuff like that. So, like, good for him. I still think he's sketchy, but whatever. I mean, it's interesting to see how these guys, kiss the ring of Trump here, so they could keep going at least for the next 4 years. But I do think that Zuckerberg, when he started like getting into the more manly stuff and getting more into MMA, that he actually did kind of start to change his views a bit because you start hanging out with different people, you start thinking different stuff. It's just kind of the way it goes, right? What is the old saying from our parents? It's like, show me your friends, I'll show you your future. That's kind of like, it's kind of what it is with some of these guys. They start hanging around more like, you know, MMA bros, and he starts getting different views, right? It's interesting. Because ultimately these are all just people, you probably got bullied at school, you had different views, um, formed by the, experiences that he had and the people that he knew growing up, right? So it's interesting. If you disagree, let me know what you think in the comments, like I said. Um, yeah, anyways, just finish off here by shilling my channel. Like, share, subscribe, comment. Let me know what you liked. This is like a first show, so what did you like? What did you not like? It's okay. You can crap on me or whatever. I'm going to try and read it objectively and try to, give people a little bit more of what they want and cut down on stuff that they don't. Ultimately, it's my show. I'm going to just be me. It is what it is. I'll pick up, people that are interested in the content that I'm providing. But I just want to know what people think regardless. So, no holds barred. You can just, recommend stuff. Um, yeah, anyways, like I said, if I transition back to this here, yeah, anyways, until next time, I guess I'll keep it simple. Take it easy. Peace.
Hey guys! Oh, big gulps, huh? All right. Well, see you later.